Hi there class. Today's little video tutorial is all around anaerobic threshold training as a method of training. This is often referred to as the AT training or sometimes lactate training. Before we really proceed with looking at anaerobic threshold training, I would like you to make sure that you have properly reviewed energy systems. So on the Ultranet I've put 2 short videos, about 7 minutes in total, reviewing the anaerobic and aerobic energy systems. And if you haven't already watched them, I'd like you to go back and watch those first before you come here and watch this little tutorial. You should take notes on this tutorial, and I'll be asking to look at your notes in our next theory lesson. So, what is the anaerobic threshold? This is the point where the lactic acid that builds up in the body actually builds up faster than what the body can remove it. And you tend to feel that burn or that extreme fatigue. It occurs at higher intensity where the energy requirements basically become too much for what the aerobic system can supply, and then it needs to supply some of that energy through the anaerobic energy system. This diagram here probably shows it a little bit better. So here we have heart rate up the side, and it declines because in age, supposedly, your maximum heart rate declines. So you can see that in this orangey zone, or light orange zone, is where we would work in our aerobic zone, I guess. And that's where we would be saying that we would be working in our aerobic energy system. Okay, up in this next level here, where they've called the anaerobic zone, we could also call that the anaerobic threshold, okay, or certainly the line between these two colours here. And that's really because when the body goes up above the energy demands that the event is the anaerobic threshold. The anaerobic threshold can be trained. One of the ways that our body fatigues during exercise is as a result of the build-up of lactic acid in our muscles. What we want to do by anaerobic threshold training is increase the body's tolerance to lactic acid, and as well as increase our ability to withstand the pain, is to be able to be more efficient at removing it and breaking it down. This way fatigue can be delayed and we can go harder for longer and also have quicker recovery. So, how can we raise our anaerobic threshold? How can we raise the point at which our body switches from using the aerobic system into using the anaerobic system for energy? We need to constantly push yourself in above the anaerobic threshold, and this will make our body adapt. Okay, and as we overload it more and more, our body gets more and more used to that and becomes better at tolerating the lactate and faster at removing it. Our aerobic enzymes become more efficient and they can process the lactic acid quickly. Now, if you're looking at this word lactate on the screen, the words lactate and lactic acid can be used interchangeably, so they pretty much mean the same thing. Using anaerobic threshold training as a method of training utilises the training principles of overload and adaptation. We can also call this method of training race pace or maximum intervals. The intensity level that we use during our periods of work is equivalent to your race pace. When you first start using this method of training, you might find that you can't quite sustain that level. So in that case, you work as hard as you can for that period of work, and then you have a recovery time, which is usually active recovery, running or jogging at a much lower intensity. We find this is really good for tempo workouts, hill work, and interval training. Training either just at the anaerobic threshold or just slightly below this zone will enable your body to better manage lactic acid production and then eventually raise this threshold level. With our training heart rate, we want to be approximately at 81 to 90% of our max heart rate for training. Obviously not for the whole period of time, but with intervals, that's where you would be during your work interval. So if we use this method of training as an interval method of training, we're looking at about twice a week, performing 3 to 5 minutes of high effort. So that's your race pace, your over 81%, working at your anaerobic threshold, and then building in some rest in between. This can be complete rest, but it's actually more effective when it is active rest, so lower intensity running or jogging, for example, if you're doing it with running. And that way you actually are actively removing the lactic acid in between your work intervals as well. The workout that I've asked you to do over the weekend off the Hamish Carter CD is actually an example of interval lactate threshold training. So hopefully you'll get a better understanding of what that looks like and what that feels like once you have completed that 40-minute running activity. If you really can't do it with the running, then perhaps it's something that you could try with your cycling or even with your swimming. There is another option. We can actually use lactate threshold training in a continuous method of training. So again, only twice a week, but you basically do about 20 minutes of race pace intensity. So it's short and sharp. You do need a warm up and a cool down though, and it can often be a good option if you've only got a short amount of time to train in. There are a few things that you need to remember. So if you're planning to do some anaerobic threshold training, then you need to make sure that on either side of that you plan some lower intensity training or a recovery activity on the day after your intense training. This is one of the key things that you need to do to make sure that you get adequate recovery, but also that you avoid overtraining and in the worst instance injury. So a maximum of 2 per week at this level, and then every 5 to 8 weeks you need to revisit this. So we'll probably do this once during our lead up to the triathlon. Revisit it, because what we should see is over a period of time in your adaptation that your anaerobic threshold should raise, and then you need to actually raise your level of overload to ensure that you are continuing to progressively overload your body in training. The components of fitness that we're targeting: aerobic and anaerobic power, and also speed as well, and muscular endurance. And one of the advantages about the anaerobic threshold training is that we actually really target both the aerobic and the anaerobic lactic acid system. So it's a great training program to target both of those energy systems at the same time. If you need to do some further research to help your understanding and to add anything at all to this video tutorial, then these are some of the references that I've used, and I encourage you to have a little look and see if some further research can help round out your understanding at all. Please remember that your homework is to complete an anaerobic threshold training for the weekend. Ideally, you'll do that with a 40-minute run. I know that a couple of you are struggling with some injuries at the moment. In that case, I'd look at you doing it with a cycle. And you do need to come and upload the CD from either my computer, or I can give you a CD to take home, because you'll need to listen to that as you're doing the activity. And the narration on that CD will take you through a 10-minute warm-up, then 4 intervals of working at 3 minutes, recovering for 3 minutes. The speed of the music also helps you to be working at approximately the right pace. So that is our learning about anaerobic threshold training, and I look forward to hearing from you what it looks like, what it feels like after you've had an opportunity to practice. Thanks very much.